Soulmates, we appreciate you so much for joining the conversation today. Plenty to discuss on this Wednesday. We first want to welcome you to FOXSOUL's Black Report. Now, we're following the latest from one family who's suing the New York School District over racism and bullying, and it's been 3 years since that lockdown. We're talking about the impact COVID-19 still has on our community. I'm Courtney Hicks.
And I'm Nicordelai Corte, plus the latest reparation efforts across the country and the Black stunt woman who's taken Hollywood by storm. They're the stories that impact our people.
Yeah, it's our news, our views, and our voice. So let's get into our big conversation for the day. The U.S. House may be divided, but when it comes to getting to the bottom of the origins of COVID-19, lawmakers are all on the same page. Now, the House voted unanimously to declassify U.S. intelligence information about what started a worldwide pandemic. With a 419-0 vote, the bill now goes to President Biden's desk to be signed into law. This week marks the 3-year anniversary since the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. U.S. intelligence agencies, however, are still divided over whether it started as a lab leak or if it came from animals. Experts say the true origin of the virus may not be known for years to come, if ever.
Now that there's a bill to help get the country on a 4-day work week, many experts are warning against it. Democratic Representative Mark Takano of California reintroduced the bill that would make the 32-hour work week a national standard. Despite popular opinion, a financial strategist says a 4-day work week is, quote, backwards economics. That's right. Jim Bianco, president of Bianco Research, says it would raise the cost of labor. He says employers will have to hire more workers, which could lead to driving up the cost of doing business. I don't know. I hope this remnant of the darkest days of the pandemic actually stays with us. And I hope it leads to, less work hours, more hours with our families.
I don't know. I gotta see how it touches that paycheck.
Fingers crossed, fingers crossed.
Vice President Kamala Harris will travel to Africa later this month, becoming the most senior Biden administration official to visit the continent. Now, her trip comes as the administration seeks to further strengthen relationships with African countries, as competitors like Russia and China have already made a lot of progress in the region. Now, Harris is scheduled to visit 3 different countries, including Ghana, Tanzania, and she's going to end that week-long trip in Zambia before returning back to D.C. This is Harris's first visit to the continent since becoming our vice president.
The FBI has released their annual report on hate crimes and have found that Black people are, surprise, surprise, the most victimized. According to the report, the FBI registered over 10,000 cases of hate crimes in 2021, up from 8,000 in 2020. The number of anti-Black hate crimes increased by 14% to a little over 3,200. Anti-Asian bias events grew by 167%. To 746 cases, and the FBI also identified nearly 1,000 victims of anti-Hispanic hate crimes across nearly 700 occurrences, or nearly 1 victim for every 70,000 Hispanics in the United States.
So the proof is in the pudding. And so, you see these stats, these reports continue to be released with even more information. So for me, why the slow drag and why the hesitancy with calling a spade when these cases continue to pop up in the news? Case in point, Rasheem Carter down in Mississippi, where you have authorities tiptoeing around, oh, is this a hate crime? Is it not a hate crime? When all of the details with what this group allegedly did to him are absolutely horrific. And for that to be even in question as to is it a hate crime or not, if you can Google it and read some of the details that people have been talking about across social media, found dismembered, allegedly being fed body parts to wild dogs. How could this not immediately cause someone to think, hate crime, especially when you look at, Black male, white male. He was complaining, calling out to his mom, felt he was being harassed and chased. I mean, here's the proof in reports like this.
Yeah, and supposedly, we have our data getting a whole lot better. The FBI data is really our FBI data is really improving significantly. and I really think that without that data, no data, no justice, right? And so, with that data, we're able to zero in on where those hot spots are. But you're right, there's a lot of hate going around. And we see it on our school campuses. We see very hostile learning environments for our kids.
That's right.
And so I'm not surprised that it's showing up, but I'm glad that we have the data to be able to back up these claims that people have previously just dismissed as anecdotal.
Sure. And speaking of hate crimes, especially on our school campuses, a New York husband and wife are suing the New York City's Department of Education on behalf of their children. Amos Winbush III and his wife Tiffany filed the suit in February, saying their children have endured unimaginable racism, physical and emotional trauma during their time at Peck Slip School. That's a public elementary school in the Manhattan area. The family claims that despite related complaints, school administrators allowed the mistreatment of the Winbush children to continue semester after semester.
And joining us now to provide more insight into the years of mistreatment and racism experienced by those children is the father, Amos Winbush III, and his attorney, Lance Clark. Welcome to Fox Soul's Black Report, and thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. Thank you for being here. So, Mr. Amos, it's mentioned in the Essence magazine article that in the lawsuit, and also in the lawsuit, that this bullying and bigotry has happened for semesters. What was the last straw that led you and your wife to file a lawsuit?
The last straw was when my daughter came home and told my wife and I that a student in her class said that slaves were dumb. And that followed by, within the same week, a student spitting in my 5-year-old's face. So that was, it was the last straw for us, over and over and over, with no resolution, with no one wanting to talk to us, with no system in place. We had no other option but to file the lawsuit.
Spitting in your 5-year-old's face? What was that like, hearing your 5-year-old come back home and explain that to you as best they could in their 5-year-old words?
The sad part about it is they didn't believe him. And they pulled the cameras and called us and said that it was an unprovoked attack. And this is the same student who just several months earlier threatened to kill my son, as well as kicked him in his stomach and his abdomen, which we then had to take him to the hospital because that evening he would not eat. He was complaining of a stomach ache. But earlier in that day, the school said that he was totally fine and it was not an issue.
What would you say to people learning about your story for the first time, wondering, well, if this happened repeatedly, why continue to enroll your kids in the school?
Yeah, I think the larger issue is not where we enroll our kids, but understanding that wherever we enroll our kids, this is going to happen. New York City has the most segregated school system in the country. So at the end of the day, those questions would be asked, why did they not remove the kid? Remove the kids and go where? And at what point in time do we stop running? When our child and our children are going to experience it in the new school, do we pick up and run then? And, it's teaching our children that when adversity is confronted, that they would need to pick up and run. And we want them to believe that they have the power to create change by just being present and sharing their voices.
Lance, these are pretty startling allegations. What has the school district said in response to what we're hearing from Mr. Amos?
Nothing. Unfortunately, nothing. You would think that when you're dealing with some of society's most vulnerable people, children, that the school district, the first thing they would have done was reach out to council, reach out to Mr. Winbush to see what can we do, to fix it. It's been mind-boggling to us that the lack of response from the school district is telling in and of itself.
Yeah. Well, what advice do you have? What advice would you have for folks out there that are in school districts, including but not limited to New York City, that are reticent, about making too much hay about what's happening with their kids in school?
You can never make too much hay about what's happening with your children in school. These are your children. Whatever the teacher teaches the child teaches the world. And historically in this country, Black children have been undereducated and underprivileged, and it allows them to be some of the most vulnerable citizens in our country. Children in and of themselves are vulnerable. A lot of them can't defend themselves, but brown children in and of themselves, and the mistreatment towards brown children is astronomical, because who comes to their defense? Who's going to save them? And the advice that I would give is stand firm, stand tall, and fight. What Amos is doing is not only commendable, but amazing, because the question that we've been asked time and time again is the same question that was posed here. Why would you leave your children in school? Running sometimes gets tiring. At some point, you have to stand firm and stand tall and say, this is not right, and I'm going to demand accountability, I'm going to demand justice, and I'm going to demand change, because we're cognizant that it's not just Amos Winbush's children who are going through this. I know that, and he knows that. But this is to let these other families know that this is not okay. And the fact that someone who doesn't look like you can tell you what is and is not racist, and that these things are all in your head and what you're experiencing is not real, these mind games that they play with us and with our children, it's offensive. And we're at the point now where we just have to call it for what it is, and we demand better accountability, and just treat him as if treat his daughter if she was a regular white girl. That's it.
Yeah. Mr. Amos, what do you want to come out of this lawsuit? And in lieu of lending your kids to this hostile learning environment, what educational alternatives are you and your wife actively considering? We've been forced to battle with where we send our kids and the damage that it would cause to uproot them from a situation that's already traumatic and place them into another situation that could be worse, and oftentimes would compile on that trauma. We've had to remove our 5-year-old from the school, and he is now being homeschooled because he's expressed to us that he doesn't want to live and that he doesn't want to go back to the Peck Slip school, and it's in our neighborhood. Literally, we can see it from every room in our apartment. We've lived in this neighborhood for 18 years. This is where we live. We are active community members. This is the fabric of New York City. And if you have elements inside of New York City that says we're okay with diversity, just not in our backyard, that doesn't work, because that's not America. Yeah, Mr. Amos, before we let you go, what advice do you have for families who may be in similar situations and don't know where to turn? I will tell you this, that incidents such as racism, bigotry, and indifference to it has risen between 2019 and the fall of 2022, just in District 2 where we are, by 27%. So we recognize that we're not alone. We know that there are thousands of families that are going through the exact same experience. And the first thing that I would say is advocate for your children. We were told that we were advocating too much, and it was our children's job to advocate for themselves, as if they hadn't already done so. We were told that what our children was experiencing wasn't racism, and then we got ignored. And it was only until we reached out to elected officials, and then those elected officials, reached out to the DOE, and they then said, Mr. Winbush, you're really articulate, and that can be scary to a lot of people. Yeah. So when racism is brought to you, don't run, don't be afraid, go at it head on, and let them know that this is about right and wrong. That's right. That's right. That's right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. A big thanks to Mr. Amos Winbush and his attorney, Mr. Lance Clark. Keep fighting the good fight, and come back again anytime to give us an update on your case.
Thank you so much for having us, brother.
Keep the faith.
All righty. Arizona's top educator is vowing to wage a war against critical race theory. Education Superintendent Tom Horn recently launched a hotline for people to report, quote, inappropriate lessons that detract from teaching academic standards. It's the end of that quote. Now, namely topics that could be considered CRT or emotional support curriculum. Meanwhile, Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs vetoed a bill that would have banned the teaching of critical race theory in Arizona schools.
It's a big deal, and what a difference an election makes. You know, not too long ago, Arizona had a Republican governor who probably would have gone along with what the superintendent is trying to do. And, you know, this is just another example of what we're seeing across the country, you know, where there's these mounting efforts, you know, to create an environment, you know, where the idea of teaching Black history, the idea of teaching, you know, LGBTQ history, you know, is looked at as something that is unsavory or something that, you know, folks need to be suspicious of. I mean, think about it. You know, at what length are folks on the other side willing to go, you know, setting up a hotline to report teachers?
What they should do, because not
teaching in the classroom?
Because not too long ago, as in February of 2022, Arizona was ranked one of the worst public school systems in the country at number 48 out of 50. And they were ranked based upon, I have it here, safety of students, success, and the quality of education. And they all ranked subpar, if you will, very much subpar, if you will. So how about you create a hotline where folks can call in and talk about how terrible Arizona's public school system continues to rank across the board. That's what you need to focus in on.
I think you're on to something. Well, in Pennsylvania, workers at one restaurant, they walked out after management announced new cocktails on the menu. The group of employees walked out of Mela Kitchen in Mount Joy Township after they learned that the new drinks on the menu were going to be called the Negro and the Caucasian, saying it made them all feel uncomfortable. What began with 16 staff members has now turned into 25 employees who have left the establishment. The drink decision allegedly came from the company Core Theater and Jack's Hard Cider, but was approved by Mela's Kitchen's owner, Donald Hoffman. Well,
obviously the employees didn't want to drink to that. Listen. There's just too much going on, like for real stuff going on. These you know, folks being murdered by police, you know, our missing and exploited children, the hate crimes we just been talking about. We just had a family on who was, you know, fighting for their children's survival and mental well-being. This foolishness here, you know, you just have to, you know, mark it, you know, and be aware of what is happening and the consciousness and the ridiculousness of people to think that something like this would be okay.
Yeah.
But then it's also a moment where you could just shake your head and maybe give it a laugh or two. Like, what would the Negro drink? What would it taste like? What would it consist of? Of course, you know, we would start with dark liquor.
Would it be brown liquor?
Yeah, brown liquor. That is how I have to process it, because it is so asinine to think that this would be okay. And then you just move on, you know?
It just creates so much more division.
It does. Right? It really does.
At a time where, you know, we need more unity. And so, I don't know, hopefully the manager of that store is rethinking
little Hennessy,
his choice.
Little dark Hennessy, little Bacardi. You start there.
Coming up, it's been 3 years since the pandemic first had us in lockdown, but many in the Black community are still struggling.
And when we come back, we'll speak to a doctor who will tell us what we can do to help ourselves and our community when it comes to this virus. Stay close. You're watching Fox Soul's Black Report. We want to welcome you back to Fox Soul's Black Report. There's a recent study that found Black children face nearly 3 times more COVID-19 related deaths and twice the hospitalizations as white children.
That's right. Lower vaccination rates among Black children may contribute to these disparities. COVID-19 significantly impacted children, accounting for 18% of all cases. The research emphasizes the disproportionate burden on Black and other children of color.
Now, the study also suggests policy changes like modifying the children's health insurance program eligibility and expanding the child tax credit to address these disparities. And as we mark the 3-year anniversary of COVID-19, this recent study serves as a sombering reminder of the pandemic's impact on our community, particularly on the Black community and children of color.
That's right. It's crucial that we continue to address these disparities to ensure that a more equitable future as we move forward in our collective fight against the virus. The fight is not over. And today we have Dr. Abu Egu, a renowned expert in infectious diseases from Yale's School of Medicine, joining us to discuss the 3-year anniversary of COVID-19. Welcome to the Black Report.
Thank you for having me. Very happy to be here.
If you don't mind, I'm going to call you Dr. O, because I have a tendency to lay people's names to rest. So is that okay, Dr. O?
You're in good company.
Thank you so much. All right. COVID-19, is it really over? I mean, people are still debating this. COVID-19 emergency declaration billed to end in May 2023. Is this, what side of the argument are you on? Over, not over? Should we still be taking precautions? Your thoughts?
The COVID-19 pandemic for sure isn't over. I mean, we see that there's still too many cases occurring every day, roughly about 30,000 cases occurring in the US. And of those, about 2,700 get hospitalized, and we're still seeing death rates in the 300 range per day. And frankly, most of these estimates probably underrepresent the true scale of the pandemic. As you well know that, lots of people are doing home tests and lots of tests are not getting reported. And also, some of the data on deaths are not reported by certain jurisdictions in the U.S. So certainly the pandemic is not over regarding just community transmission. However, there's some good news and some silver lining, because we're seeing a dissociation between cases and bad outcomes, such as death, because we now have effective vaccines to protect against severe disease, even if people get infected. And we also have, better treatments. We've lost some along the way, but we have really defined what treatment works for that. And we even know how better to manage people when they're hospitalized, when to use oxygen, put people on ventilators, etc. So we're in a better space now than we've been historically, but there's still a lot more work to be done.
Dr. Abu Egu, beyond the disparities in COVID-19 numbers, how is COVID-19's impact on the Black community? How has it lingered? We hear stories in the news about long COVID and some of the other issues related to COVID-19. Talk to us specifically about Black folks. How has it lingered?
So that's a great question, right? And frankly, we don't have all the answers yet. And I think we're going to be learning about these for months to years to come, just the whole impact of COVID. And looking at the impact of COVID, not just the direct effects from the disease itself, but like you mentioned, long-term sequelae from the disease, which includes long COVID symptoms. And for some people, those symptoms could persist and be devastating to the point where people are not able to return back to work, or at least their prior level of functioning. And so we've also seen that there are higher rates of mental health diagnosis in people who've recovered from COVID-19. And, part of it is all the uncertainty that happened during the COVID era, and just the fear and anxiety that induces into individuals who are vulnerable to the disease. We know it affected, people's income and employment. And, there have been some curious coincidences that have occurred, particularly among the Black community. We now see, for example, we knew that there were a lot more overdose deaths during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the recent trends are actually suggesting that Black men specifically, compared to their peers, are actually seeing much higher rates per population of opioid-related deaths. And we also know that there are probably other collateral harms that have occurred, because we know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, routine health services were either delayed or disrupted, including things that disproportionately impact Black communities, such as HIV, reproductive health, etc., and even cancer screening. So we're really going to unearth some of the significant injury that's occurred over time.
Yeah, and one of the concerning issues with COVID-19 and the pandemic is that the vaccine uptake, which that the vaccine has proven to be very effective, has been pretty poor for Black communities. What are some of the reasons, your thoughts on why, and then how can these reasons be addressed?
Yeah, so that's a concern, right? And something I've really been working very hard on over the past 3 years, right? Because I think it's a sad fact that the communities that are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic are the ones that actually struggle the most with receiving a quite highly effective and safe option to protect against COVID-19. And so the good news, though, is if you look at the trends from earlier on in the pandemic to currently, it seems there have been a little bit of catch-up among Black communities because, we found that when we use the term vaccine hesitancy is kind of a broad term that ranges from people who want to just delay vaccination to ensure that, someone else gets it and safe, or more data has accrued so that their confidence in its safety was fine. Some had concerns about safety in pregnancy. You mentioned the issue with kids. If parents are hesitant, then you can imagine they're even more hesitant to even have their kids vaccinated. But the good news is that we saw an uptick in receipt of vaccines by the Black community, suggesting that our community is amenable to all the different strategies we did, trying to make vaccines available, trying to engage communities, to educate people about the vaccines, and really, trusted messengers like myself, being a researcher in the field, really, sending out that message and word to the community that these were rigorously assessed for safety and efficacy and they should be used. The sad part, though, is that we're seeing much more newer variants that are more transmissible and immune evasive, and the latest iteration of the vaccines, the boosters, still remain with very low uptake. Less than 20% of the individuals across races have received that, and that's very concerning.
Real quick, what lessons have we learned so far that will help to prevent the next public health emergency?
COVID-19 was a stress test. I think it really showed us huge deficiencies in the way we deliver healthcare, in the way we prepare for epidemics, and the way we respond to them when they do occur in almost every aspect of the response, from disease surveillance, to stay in touch with just the scale of the disease and new variants emerging, to making testing available, to making sure there's equitable access to treatments like you have mentioned, the same thing with vaccines. We failed. So I think that this is really an opportune moment and really has unearthed things that many of us have known existed all along. As an HIV provider, for example, these are things we've always seen, that communities of color are disproportionately impacted by some of these things due to just their vulnerabilities. So I think moving forward, I think even just generating the data on the disparities, I think really showcases the disparities to the world and calls for action. But we really need to deal with key issues like medical mistrust, medical messaging, equitable access to healthcare, treatments, institutionalized racism, and medical mistrust, all those things that are huge barriers to engaging the Black communities in what I consider to be life-saving interventions. And I hope moving forward that we address some of these.
Indeed. Dr. O, thank you so much for your time today and your insight. We appreciate your efforts in getting us and keeping us together. And we'll definitely have to have you back to talk more about this as we continue the fight against COVID-19. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me and shining light on this important issue.
Absolutely. And we're going to stay with this important issue as we look in on the third anniversary of this lockdown. You might remember it started with toilet paper shortages.
Remember that?
On in through actually the appearance of this vaccine. And the pandemic has been quite a memorable period for many of us. However, sources say some details may fade over time due to the limitations of our memory. So our brains prioritize distinctive, emotionally charged events, which makes the pandemic seem unforgettable. Yet information overload and everyday routines can make it difficult to hold on to these memories. And how society chooses to remember and commemorate the pandemic will influence its place in our collective memory for generations, and I'll say ages to come.
What's the fondest memory that you have from the pandemic, and what's the worst memory you have from the pandemic?
Fondest fondest memory is that I feel like spiritually the veil was lifted, and you really had to deal with it. You came face to face with who you are relative to who you want to be, where you've been, where you're going. And I think that was the beauty and some of the positivity in the pandemic. For me, some of the somber, darker moments was I had an aunt who was part of that first round of victims in the nursing home, late March, early April, who passed on from the virus. There was no vaccine. Hospitals were twisted and medical folks were twisted on how to actually treat it. And she was one of those first ones where my cousins had to say goodbye via cell phone, you know? So that was one of the darkest moments, and I had to come to work and still be an anchor, you know? So for me, what about you?
Yeah, no, I mean, one of my fondest memories were, you know, sunset bike rides, because, you know, we couldn't get into the gym, right? And so you had to make do and, you know, have as much physical activity as you could figure out. And so doing that was a fond memory, something I grew to enjoy. But very similar to you, you know, stories of, you know, people that I knew, and there's one person in particular that died alone. And there are actually a number of people I know that died alone. And, you know, that's a very unsettling thought. I think it's a fear for a lot of people. You know, spending your last moments on earth by yourself, let alone in the midst of a global pandemic where it just feels like the world is upside down.
Yeah, looks like my social media timeline became a rolling obituary. Classmates, high school friends, friends from the neighborhood, neighbors. It was depleting. It was depleting. And I think it showed how much we were connected to one another or needed to be more connected to one another. Connectivity, I think, is another a positive lesson that hopefully came out of the pandemic, at least for me.
And how much we still need to be connected to one another.
And cherish the ones you love the most.
That's right. Up next, we're talking reparations. Show us the money.
Give it, and I'm about to move to San Francisco. You tell your mama I'm on my way. You think I'm playing. You want to listen out for this story. We'll tell you which cities are ready to start paying up and which ones are just getting started. You're watching Fox Soul's Black Report. I'm going to San Francisco.
Come on, Golden Gate.
I'm about to move. Welcome back, Soulmates. You ready to talk about reparations?
I am.
St. Louis Mayor Tashara Jones advances her executive order to establish a reparations commission.
That's right. The volunteer commission aims to analyze the city's history of race-based harms and current injustices. Reparations models are gaining traction nationwide, with Evanston, Illinois becoming the first city to offer reparations to Black residents in 2021. California formed a 9-member reparations task force in 2020, and Congressmember Sheila Jackson Lee introduced H.R. 40 in 2019, a bill for a federal commission to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans.
Is it against the law to claim residency in all these states
in California
that are starting to get it together?
Right. I mean, you know, this is very encouraging.
It is.
You know, reparations is really about, it's repairing the harm. You know, and you know what I'm really enjoying about this movement is that different municipalities, different levels of government are thinking creatively about different ways in which they can repair the harm. And I'd like to think, you know, that's fundamentally a good thing for this country.
My only concern is that I think hopefully they all can get on code with one particular policy or way of going about distributing, and so everybody gets a fair shake at the reparations. I think, you know, with each state or city going about it a different way, I'm hoping none of us get lost in the sauce or fall between the cracks with what we're owed or what's decided that we're owed. That's my only, there seems to be a lot of different ways of trying to go about it. It's a hard issue to tackle, if you will. And on the other side of it, I just want to make sure that everybody, all of our soulmates, are taken care of the way that they should be.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I worry about is, you know, what happens, you know, if, for example, California passes a reparations bill that includes money, or San Francisco does, and, you know, folks are entitled to $5 million, however way in which they decide that. What happens when, you know, people decide to hold it up in the courts? We've seen this happen with regard to student debt cancellation. We've seen this happen with regard to the Farm Bill. And so that's my only worry, is that, whatever is done, I hope that it doesn't get tied up in courts for years and years.
Well,
and
I
years.
shouldn't have wouldn't tie my money up. San Francisco, speaking of which, is looking to pay out $5 million in reparations by recommending reparations be paid to every eligible Black adult in the city. Now, the goal is to aid in eliminating personal debt and tax burdens, providing guaranteed annual incomes of at least $97K for 250 years, and being able to buy homes in San Francisco for just $1 a family. Those were some of the more than 100 recommendations made by a city-appointed reparations committee, and that committee hasn't done an analysis of the cost of the proposals, but critics have slammed the plan as financially and politically impossible. And I can see why critics would side with that being sort of kind of impossible. Though some of those are big asks. However, what they've done to us was a terrible tragedy, and the continued fallout from generations to generations. You just can't take away what's been done for 400 plus years. So the ask should be big and astronomical, in my opinion.
Well, and mind you, when people say, oh, it's financially and politically impossible, well, once upon a time when we were talking about climate change, there's a lot of people that saw that as a fringe issue. They didn't see the government investing billions and billions of dollars in fighting climate change. And so in our lifetime, we've seen an example on a number of different issues where people would say it's impossible, for us to pass that politically, or it's impossible, for us to make that kind of investment. Think of gay marriage, for example. Once upon a time, the idea of that being the law of the land, that was out of the question. And so look at how far we've come in the conversation around reparations. It's gone from being a fringe conversation to a mainstream conversation. You have, major leaders in government at every level, that are looking at this issue, and not just as an academic exercise, but they're looking at how to practically get this done.
Well, they could gather that money to send to Ukraine. So I figure they can gather it and help us folks who have been in need for a long time. And have deserved the help.
Well, speaking of folks that have been in need a whole long time, former Mississippi Representative Kathy Sykes is speaking out on efforts in Mississippi by the majority white legislature to create courts with appointed rather than elected judges. The efforts would also expand patrols by state police inside the majority Black capital city of Jackson. Sykes calling it Jim Crow 2.0, and says people in other parts of the U.S. should pay attention to what's happening in Mississippi, because ideas in one state can spread to others pretty quickly. The Mississippi House and Senate this year have passed different versions of bills dealing with police and courts in Jackson, which has the highest percentage of Black residents of any major U.S. city. Negotiators from the two chambers are expected to work on final versions of the bills in the next 2 weeks.
All right, time now for Today in Black History. For Women's Her Story Month, we honor Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett. Dr. Corbett's team developed the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine, which would not only prove to be one of the greatest tools in battling one of the worst pandemics since the 1918 Spanish flu, but would change vaccine science forever. Her groundbreaking work marked a turning point in the global pandemic.
That's right. And since developing the vaccine that has saved countless lives around the world, Dr. Corbett has continued to make an impact as a public figure in the conversation around vaccine hesitancy and misinformation.
All right, still ahead, she's taking risks and defying all odds. Hollywood has an it girl when it comes to stunts.
That's right. We'll introduce you to Carrie Bernas, the woman behind some of our favorite scenes on the silver screen. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Fox Soul's Black Report. Welcome back to Fox Soul's Black Report. Michelle Obama is taking aim at former President Donald Trump as she reflects on her time at the White House and having to leave when Trump won.
She started off by saying that she and Barack felt a sense of obligation to not only the country, but to the Black community while being in office, and says what Trump represented was totally different from the legacy they built. Take a listen.
So we were saying goodbye to the staff and all the people who helped to raise them. There were tears, there was that emotion, but then to sit on that stage and watch the opposite of what we represented on display. There was no diversity, there was no color on that stage. There was no reflection of the broader sense of America.
Yeah, and you know, they kept a good face, but every now and again you could see the face cracking. Like
the whole time. From when
they kept it very presidential, but every now and again you saw Sister Michelle.
I think Barack kept it very presidential. I think Michelle did the best she could.
I said she dipped in and out.
Right, you know, and from the moment that former President Trump and former First Lady Melania Trump pulled up to the White House where they do the gift exchange, faces were already tight, right? And then so by the time they were in the motorcade, they made it to the platform. Michelle's looking around, and Michelle, the look on her face was the look that a lot of us had as we were watching this inauguration.
Are
like,
you
what
kidding
happened?
me?
Who did it? What is going on here? Is this real? Somebody pinch me.
Yeah, it was quite a day. To say the least.
Quite a day and quite a 4 years.
That's right. All right, we're excited to introduce our next exceptional guest, a trailblazing sister who is a stunt woman, breaking barriers and inspiring the next generation in the industry, and contributing to iconic films like Black Panther, Lovecraft Country, and Avengers Endgame. We're talking about the talented Carrie Bernas as she joins us to talk more about her captivating journey and to learn about the world of stunts and that type of representation in Hollywood. Welcome to the show. We appreciate you being here for us.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with y'all, and I'm loving the segment. Y'all are killing it.
Thank you. Thank you. We just wrapped up, Oscars week, and we see everybody in front of the camera. Rarely do we get a chance to talk to folks, behind the camera and or in the backdrop, making these films real, and these actors and what they do in these films real. So you've worked on numerous high-profile projects, and you've made a significant impact in the industry. Share with us some of those challenges that you faced being a Black stunt woman in particular, and how you've kind of overcome to achieve this amazing success in your career at this point.
Absolutely. As a Black stunt woman, I've definitely faced some challenges in comparison to, let's say, a white stunt woman. But I would say the majority of those challenges were faced with the previous people that actually got us into stunts, like Black stunt women that were able to gain their skills and take risk and was willing to just step up to the plate. I think back, let's just say in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, we did not commonly see a lot of Black stunt women exist because there was a lot of paint downs going down. For some reason, there was a sense that Black people could not drift cars, or they couldn't ride motorcycles the way that a white person did. But they broke barriers that then allowed me to come in and also show myself. One of the things that I guess I appreciate the most is that when people underestimate me or think that they can't find a Black person to do a certain stunt, like a horse or motorcycle or a fight, is to show them that it does exist and you can. So I think that for the most part, it's about continuing to prove ourselves in some ways, to show that we have it on record, on file, by film, by camera, and then when we show up to set, to just kill it, which kind of sucks. You don't want to always have to prove yourself. You want to say, like, this is what I can do, and somebody to believe you and just go out there and do it. But you know what? I like when a person underestimates me and I can show them that I'm more than what they thought that, I wasn't.
Absolutely. And when you talk about, we are the epitome of agility and strength and creativity and flexibility. So to think that would be questioned in your line of work is absolutely nuts to me. So with the increasing visibility of Black stunt professionals like yourself, what advice would you give to aspiring stunt performers of color who want to break into the industry and do what you do? It's fascinating.
Absolutely.
You ask me.
Yeah. First off, I would tell them that I'm happy that they know it exists. One of the things that I wish I knew is that it exists when I was younger, because I used to be out in the streets riding motorcycles and dirt bikes and all this stuff, flipping around. But number two is that you have to work hard. No matter what part of the industry that you're in, you're always going to be, you know, competing against the next person. And it's not to say you're in competition with a friend or whatever the case may be, but the people that ultimately achieve success in this industry, they're very disciplined and they're always practicing multiple things. So they're not just skilled in one area. If you want a longevity in this career, yes, we do have some stunt people that focus specifically on driving or specifically on water work. But if you want longevity and to be able to work in majority of the projects and sets and films, etc., then I would say to go ahead and get your scuba diving certifications, like learn to feel comfortable in water in case you have an opportunity to do water. But if that's not your thing, also don't press it. But, you know, if you're going to learn fights, then also learn roles, and then also maybe learn how to do like 1 or 2 backflips or tricks. If you don't do backflips, then make sure that you're really good at wire work, so then they can put you on wire and you can do the flips on there and it's able to assist you. Just like the well-roundedness, when you think about actual, let's say, when you're CEO of a company, for example, you know, you have to have like several different skill sets in order to be able to lead and to take charge and to sit. And then the last thing I would do, I would say around like physical preparedness and having that skill set is then to pick up something else.
Sure.
Like, as you can see, the acting role that I have here. I'm also an actor as well. So sometimes you have an opportunity to do acting in stunts where it's a high risk stunt that they actually want to put someone in that also knows other skills, you know.
Yeah,
so
makes you a double threat. You can act and you can go do the stunt. Yeah.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about how you've impacted so many children through your nonprofit foundation. Tell us a little bit more about that effort.
Absolutely. So I have a nonprofit called CBC Foundation. It was started basically because when I was younger, my mom was 17 when she had me, like 6 months until I was about 15 years old. My mom was an incredible, amazing, hardworking person. But one of the things is that we had a lot of organizations and nonprofits that gave back to us. What I wanted to do, started with 10 kids our first year, and last year it was over 300 kids that got to participate. Amazing.
Paying it forward. We love you for that. Before we wrap you up, I heard in my ear you were about to be somebody's mama. Is this your first go around, second time? We're about 8 months. You ready to drop in a minute. How you handle?
Yeah.
I'm taking you're not doing too many stunts nowadays, Miss Carrie.
I'm not. I did some about 4 months ago, I guess. I don't know. I took my baby on a road ride.
Girl.
I know it sounds crazy. But, I mean, I was drifting in the car and it was stick shift and they really needed somebody. And it was for a friend, so I did it. But
okay.
I am on my first child. So crazy, so shocking, but so exciting. He is doing stunts in my belly. So yeah. I'm excited to introduce him to the world and excited about his journey in this life and just like, you know, adding another stripe to the layer, I guess, about being a mama too. I always wanted to be a mom.
Absolutely.
Unexpected. But it's
absolutely
exciting.
We got to follow you across your social media platforms so we can see baby Bernas come into this world. We love you. We appreciate you. Thank you for just representing in this area. And we got to have you back to talk to you again. Carrie Bernas, stunt woman extraordinaire. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you all
God bless
so much.
on that baby girl, baby boy.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
The Apollo and D-Nice announced the special Harlem Renaissance themed 3rd anniversary of Club Quarantine, celebrating community, connection, and culture. On Saturday, March 18th at 8 p.m., this once-in-a-lifetime evening will head to the Apollo's historic stage as a revolutionary virtual club that safely brought millions of us together to experience community amidst isolation. Since March 2020, D-Nice's Club Quarantine has been a global rhythmic respite, a multi-generational and multi-genre experience. Club Quarantine is a global celebration of music, life, and love.
And it was just so dope. It was so needed. It just, catapulted him into a whole nother hemisphere because he was already that dude in regards to, the whole hip hop scene and DJing and coming up. I do believe it was MC Light. And it was just so well needed. And from the pandemic, so much was birthed. Versus was dope.
That's right.
I think my favorite one was, I think Erica and Jill Scott, I think that versus is still going on. That thing was about 5 hours long. I like the Izies, Earth, Wind and Fire, Mary
Teddy Riley.
Well, that was the cause for a lot of interesting color commentary. But so much, that the pandemic is going to always be what it's going to be. Challenge yourself to find what was positive in the pandemic.
That's right.
And that was definitely something positive.
You're absolutely right. And there's more to come right here on FOXSOUL's Black Report. When we return, it's Black Excellence.
It's Black Excellence time. The Black eyewear company that's making history with their newest deal. You're going to want to wait around for this one. You're watching FOXSOUL's Black Report. Sell it, sister. Sell it.
Founders of a Black-owned eyewear line are making history with a Nickelodeon licensing deal. Nancy Harris and Tracy Green's company, Vontélle, is the first of its kind to establish a partnership with Paramount and Nickelodeon.
Their licensing deal allows them to exclusively make fashion-forward eyewear products for kids using popular characters like SpongeBob SquarePants, Baby Shark, and the Rugrats. Despite launching during the pandemic, Vontélle has been able to thrive with more people looking to eyewear as a way to show off their personality during virtual meetings.
I know a little something about that. The company is quickly becoming a leader in the eyewear business, and with over 1 billion people worldwide in need of eyeglasses, Vontélle is excited to enter the industry at the right time with their handcrafted ethnic design.
You go, ladies. Congrats on that. For the full rundown on today's stories and more, you can access FOXSOUL's video on demand on any of our partners. You can even access past shows and all that other good content. Make sure you download the FOXSOUL app. It is absolutely free. We enjoyed you today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Courtney Hicks.
And I'm Nicordelide Corte. Until next time, soulmates, be sure to stay lifted.
Absolutely.